Good morning. We will start in a couple of minutes since people are joining. Please be reminded to turn off your microphone and your camera. Okay, I think we can start. In meanwhile, people are joining the meeting. So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Can Biofuels Drive Our Future, organized as part of the Energy Days of EU Sustainable Energy Week. Thank you for taking time out and being here. Please be reminded to keep your microphone and your camera off during the webinar. Just for your information, we are recording the webinar, so if you don't want to be recorded, please switch off your microphone and your camera. My name is Maddalena Ripa, and I will be your moderator today. I'm a researcher at Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I'm currently working on an Horizon 2020 project named MAGIC, short for Moving Towards Adaptive Governance in Complexity, which is the project organizing this webinar, and whose goal is to explore and signify the complexity of the relationship between water, energy, food, and climate. In MAGIC, we have developed a new approach to check the consistency of the narratives used in policy discussion. We call it quantitative storytelling. The goal of the quantitative storytelling is to explore different perspectives of a given sustainability issue. In this case, the future of biofuels. Quantitative storytelling does not look for the truth about an issue, but for a richer understanding of the issue, exploring alternative framings. In relation to the proverbial thinking outside the box, we're proposing a walking across alternative ways for framing the biofuel issue. Today, we hope to enrich our view on biofuels throughout a discussion with our panel and the audience in response to 3 short presentations about the role that biofuels can play in a radical decarbonization of the EU economy. The presentations focus on the results obtained in 2 big Horizon 2020 projects on the water, energy, and food nexus, MAGIC and Syn4 Nexus, funded under the societal challenges, climate action, environment, resource efficiency, and raw materials. MAGIC will be represented by Mario Giampietro and Syn4 Nexus by Nico Polman. So Mario is an career professor at the UAB and the coordinator of MAGIC. He's a veteran in the field of energy and biofuels. Mario is best known for the development of the innovative scientific approach MUSIASM, multi-scale integrated assessment of societal and ecosystem metabolism, and its contribution to complexity theory in the field of sustainability. He co-fathered the approach quantitative storytelling and is noted for exposing uncomfortable knowledge in the fields of energy and environmental policy. Nico Polman is a senior researcher responsible for investigation regarding agricultural economics, resilience, innovative agriculture business model, economic governance, and rural development. As case study leader and researcher, he is involved in 3 innovative Horizon 2020 projects: sustainably integrated management for the nexus of water, land, food, energy, climate for resource efficiency Europe, which is SIM for Nexus, modeling individual decision to support the European policies related to agriculture, which is MindStep, and social innovation in marginalized rural area, SIMRA. Together with our speakers, today we have an amazing panel to open the discussion about biofuels that I'm going to introduce you. We have Zoltan, who is a policy officer at the European Commission, Directorate General for Research and Innovation in the Unit of Climate Action and Planetary Boundaries. In this job, he is mostly engaged in the formulation of climate science under the EU Framework Programme for Research, works with the IPCC as part of the EU delegation, and by coordinating for the Commission the government review of IPCC reports, and participates in the negotiation under the UNFCCC covering the item on research and systematic observation. Prior to this job, he worked for 15 years in the Directorate General for Environment on a range of land use related issues, including involvement in climate change negotiation, the formulation of EU legislation, such as the bioenergy provision of the Renewable Energy Directive and its recast, the land use, land change and forestry regulation, as well as the EU strategies on forest biodiversity, bioeconomy, and adaptation to climate change. The second panelist is Lotte. She is an assistant professor in biotechnology and society. Lotte has a PhD in philosophy of technology. Her main research interests concern responsible innovation in the field of biotechnology and synthetic biology. 2 recent research projects concern the development of inclusive global bio-based value chains with case studies in Brazil, US, and South Africa. The third panelist is Zolt. He is an economist, a climate action policy veteran, and the specialist of the corresponding instruments, policies, and measures with an engagement in the full cycle, from policy domain implementation to evaluation and auditing of climate change mitigation and resilience globally. He has worked more than 20 years on climate action after starting his career at the Environment and Geography Department of the London School of Economics as a researcher. His first encounter with the complex and controversial nature of biofuel use for energy generation happened in the early 2000s as he worked for the pioneering Dutch government's carbon credit initiative and with World Bank's prototype carbon fund. Before we dive into the presentation, I would like to go over a few items so you will know what to expect. We have 2 speakers who will give 3 opening statements of 10 minutes each, beginning with Mario, who will give 2 presentations having the goal to show an heterodox view on the issue of biofuels, looking at the past experience done in US and Brazil and reflecting on the possible future of biofuels in Europe. After the 2 presentations given by Mario, Nico Polman will be sharing with us some of the results of the Sim4Nexus project and specifically will provide some insights on different pathways for production and use of biomass in the Netherlands between 2020 and 2050 by means of systematic dynamic model and a serious game. Following the opening statement, each panelist will have a 5 minutes short speech reflection on the presentation, and then we will open up the floor to the audience. So if you have any comments or questions, please type your question in the Zoom chat and I will bring them up. Please indicate to whom your question is addressed. Panelist or speaker will have 2 or 3 minutes to address the question. And last, we would like to encourage you to share today's discussion with your social networks using the Magic Nexus tag. And if there are no major questions about the program and the organization, I will kick off the presentation with Mario. I will stop sharing my screen. Okay, Mario, if you want to start giving your presentation, you have 10 minutes each, okay?
Okay. Tell me if you can see my screen. You see now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, welcome everybody. Then I am going now to share with you what I learned in the 90s, because believe it or not, I was in the States in the 90s, and I was involved in the first big war on the agro-biofuel assessment. And so I can share what I learned there, and also we can have a view of something that already happened in the past, so there is less emotional discussion attached to this. Okay, so first of all, how Maddalena already said, with quantitative storytelling, we are not claiming that now we are telling you how is the situation, what is right, what is wrong. But this is, I'm sorry, you don't see full screen?
No.
No?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. But it is a way of exploring a different aspect, a different view of the problem. It should be noted that the discussion about biofuel is very old in the States. As a matter of fact, in 1945, there was this book about biofuel that ended in this way, talking about renewable energy sources. And the quote is fantastic. It said, "It is said that we should use alcohol and vegetable oils after the petroleum energy has been exhausted. This reminds one of Marie Antoinette's advice to the Paris poor to eat the cake when they had no bread. Alcohol and vegetable oils are of course more expensive than petroleum. Moreover, if all our crops were converted to alcohol and oil, they will not supply the present rate of petroleum energy consumption." So what I'm trying to show you that this was basically what we found when we were looking at the production of ethanol from corn that was done in the States. So what is the big difference between fossil fuels and agro-biofuels? Is that basically oil has not to be produced, it's already there, it has been made by nature. So basically, when you are producing energy carrier with fuel, with oil, basically you are extracting oil, refining oil, and you get gasoline. Whereas if you are doing agro-biofuel, you have to start having soil, water, biodiversity, then you have to wait, then the biomass is producing itself, then you make beer, then from beer you make ethanol. It is a much slower and expensive process to do. This is the standard input-output of the process. You have to put natural resources, a lot of input and some labor to make corn. Then this imply environmental impact. Then you have additional input, additional labor to move from corn to alcohol, and then you produce 66 gigajoule of ethanol. As a matter of fact, it is not true that you are producing 66 gigajoule of ethanol, because you have to take out the amount of energy that you put into producing it. So, and this is the issue here. In the sense, this system is not producing energy carrier, it's transforming energy carrier that are very good, fossil energy, into energy carrier that are pretty bad, is ethanol, as is a low density per unit of weight. So basically, the first policy lesson here is that the production of ethanol from corn in the States had nothing to do with energetic consideration. You have a system in which you are spending, probably they spend $100 billion of taxpayer money to transform fossil energy into ethanol in more or less the same quantity, a very valuable energy input in not that valuable energy output, by making damage to the environment. The situation in Brazil is completely different. There, they are using much less they used to, because this is, we're talking about 80s, 90s, the first generation. They were not using much inputs, so the output input was much higher. Then it was about producing energy carriers, but it took an enormous amount of labor to do that. So it was a very low labor productivity system, and basically, this is well known in South America, where sugarcane is called the hierba de la miseria, the weed of misery. You can have a second policy lesson about large-scale production of biofuel. If you are relying on the natural pace of ecological processes, they are going too slow and they are not very dense in space. So basically, the society will not become richer by moving from using oil to using alternative oil. So, to explain this, we can use the metaphor of a heart transplant. Let's imagine that the society is something consuming energy, and then you want to take out the actual heart, that is the energy sector powered by fossil fuel, and you want to put an energy sector powered by biofuels. Okay, then if you want to do that, you have to check two things: whether the society can provide enough control to the system in terms of labor, and whether the society has enough space where to put this new heart. So let's go in terms of hours. We already saw before that in the case of the United States, the hours that were in the system were well-paid jobs, but this was due to the enormous amount of technology used in the process. So basically, the system was economically viable only because of heavy economic subsidies, 100 billions in subsidies get in. If you are looking at the situation in sugarcane, relying on natural processes, the productivity of labor was very, very bad. Bad jobs, as a matter of fact, were semi-slave in the plantation. And basically, you got that this system was not generating socioeconomic development. Oops, not here. Okay, just to visualize the difference between fossil energy and other types of alternative energy based on biomass. This is a machine used in Germany to get the coal. This machine is supplying 10,000 trucks of coal and is operated by 7 persons. And this is what you see if you are looking at people generating, cutting sugarcane, or people setting a palm oil plantation. If we're getting to the requirement of cropland, the situation is even easier to explain. In pre-industrial times, basically cities were concentrating the surplus coming from the countryside. So basically, you had to have a lot of land, but also a lot of farmers paying taxes to the city. And for this reason, we didn't have cities basically in pre-industrial time. Whereas with fossil energy, the situation is completely different. You get fossil energy getting into the city, and the city gives energy to the countryside. And then this is why basically we are getting to a population that is mainly urban in the world. Václav Smil, that is the guru of energy analysis in the world, are trying to explain the situation, looking at the different in density of energy production and consumption, power density. And you see these are the classic land uses of urban population. And then you can see the classic density of production of biomass. You can see that there is a difference that is logarithmic, that this is a logarithmic scale, so there are order of magnitude. And then you can see that cities are possible only because the density of the energy sources are order of magnitude higher. So where the biofuel is in this map, the biofuel is even lower than the official biomass because, of course, you have to spend money, energy in producing and transformation and in transport. So what is the take-home message of all this reflection on what happened in the first generation of agro-biofuel? Is that for centuries, or probably 1,000 years, the population on this planet has been more or less constant, the energy consumption more or less constant, and the required land more or less constant. And at a certain point with fossil energy, everything happened in the sense was a major revolution. The population started growing dramatically, the consumption per capita even quicker, and the land use per capita going dramatically down. So what does this mean? Basically, modern technical progress was using oil to save land and labor. And what is the logic of agro-biofuel is to use land and labor to save oil. So definitely this doesn't look good in the sense as a starting point for a project of economic growth. If you want to know more about our work, you can visit us. And then last but not least, the presentation, the last slide with our consortium and the disclaimer. This is important because I know that we have our project officer looking here and this is compulsory. That's it. This is the first presentation.
Thanks, Mario. So would you go for the second one on biofuel in Europe, no?
Yeah, maybe it's better to go directly to the other one so we can save time.
Okay. Yeah, you already saved 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay.
With your first presentation.
Okay, so this is a reflection on the situation of biofuels in Europe and the future. Again, the same disclaimer. This is not the truth, it's a point of view about what is happening. And of course, there are other ways of framing the issue that would be as important as this one. And there are 4 main points. One, we are all agree, there is a general agreement about that we are phasing out agro-biofuel, but what we are using at the moment are biofuels, and all the subsidies goes in the conventional agro-biofuels. This agro-biofuel, this solution at this moment is not particularly effective, it's completely negligible in relation to the use of fossil energy. The idea of using waste will not solve the problem because we do not have enough waste to do it. And then finally have a look about what we have in terms of next generation of biofuel. So we can start with the riddle of biofuels, why we are producing them. We saw before that basically it is very difficult to imagine to substitute fossil energy with agro-biofuel. And then the second justification was that in this way, at least we are reducing the emission. As a matter of fact, this is not true. Finally, in 2008, science break the taboo and then start saying, okay, if you are considering the indirect land use change, it is not true that they are reducing the emission. The Commission acknowledged this fact, I believe, in 2012. And now, if you are looking at this is a recent paper, even the proponent of biofuels say that the first generation biofuel are the less sustainable biofuel production alternative. So it is not for replacing fossil energy, it's not for reducing emission. And then there is an obvious problem with agro-biofuel. They are compete with food in the production of food. So even the World Bank at a certain point took position by leaking a secret report that they never make an official statement. They leak secret report saying that it was a crime against humanity. So, but in spite everyone say that this is bad, we don't want them, then why we are agro-biofuel at the moment? Because the European Commission allocate around 7, 8, 9 billion of euros of subsidies to keep them alive. And this more or less is more than half of the biofuel market. So without the subsidies, they will not be there. So it is worth to invest this money in this biofuel. As a matter of fact, they are pretty much irrelevant. This is the yellow is the consumption of fuel, the blue is the biodiesel. And the bioethanol, we saw before, the bioethanol is the less effective biofuel, so it's even lower. And then if you're looking at different countries one by one, you see, with an exception of Sweden and Norway, and we will discuss this later on, basically they are not particularly used in Europe. So how do we produce this biofuel? If you're looking, these are the feedstock, and basically you can see that we are talking about agro biofuel again. 56% are imported, but this is used oil, is palm oil basically, and these are other for bioethanol, and basically 53% is imported. But what is very interesting as well is that if you take the Netherlands, for instance, the biofuels are imported and exported. So you can see in the Netherlands, you have a situation in which basically not even 10% of the biofuels used in transportation is produced for local feedstock. So basically, it is not clear why we are having a regulation and subsidies. They are used for a legitimate business of importing and exporting, but really they are not saving emission, they are not contributing to reduction the consumption of fossil energy, so it is not clear. So then the next step was, okay, but then we can use more waste. So then we start getting alternative possible fuel, like used cooking oil is a famous case. And then they were getting a double counting. In order to reach your target, you can count double the use of these alternative eco-friendly fuels. So the Netherlands quadrupled the consumption. And then at a certain point, it was clear that it was too much used cooked oil sold as cooked oil. And there was a fraud. They were basically palm oil sold as used cooking oil. But could we have guessed the existence of a fraud? Of course, yes. If you would have looked at how much is the waste that you want to use, you can see that the amount of used cooked oil collected per capita in Europe is less than 1 kilo per capita per year. In the Netherlands, by the way, is one of the lowest, 200 grams per person per year. You can add some from restaurant and industry, and you can arrive to 1 kilo, something like that, 1.5 kilos, something like that. But if you start with the used cooked oil, and then you get gross biodiesel, then you take out the consumption, basically we are talking about a few hundred grams per capita per year, and the average consumption of diesel in Europe is hundreds of kilos per capita. So it is not clear what we are talking in the first place about this as a possible alternative fuel. So let's get to the next generation. Let's get back to what are at the moment, the available feedstock that we are using to produce biofuels. And then you can see that basically these have to disappear according to the plan of the European Commission. These have to be reduced to avoid fraud and other things. Then basically the only hope remain the cellulosic ethanol that was produced in this quantity in the 2016, but the big company that was producing got bankrupt. So basically at the moment, this doesn't look particularly good as the biofuel that will save us. We did, as a matter of Bugnot, did a study and the other group in 20 about the potentiality of cellulosic ethanol from residues, and it really doesn't look particularly good. The best you can do is 3.44% of the final consumption, but still there are a lot of problems. They are costly to collect. They are very different in different areas of Europe. The residues are bulky to transport, so they would require an enormous investment in biorefineries, roads, transportation. And moreover, you have to leave a fraction of residues in the field. So this is a very risky option, and really why you want to go there to replace 3% of the final energy carriers. Another big, the real hope that everyone was discussing was about producing ethanol from lignocellulosic biomass, because then the feedstock is available, there is a lot of it, but still there are a lot of problems in relation to the different steps of the process. Collection and transport and handling still is pretty costly. The pre-treatment is the most delicate issue because it's very different for different types of biomass feedstocks. The enzymatic hydrolysis is still problematic. The enzymes denature very, very soon. The fermentation still has problems. So all the four steps of the process are all four problematic. And then, but there is an important point that is missed by this technical discussion of the problem, is that there is a missing environmental narrative about the bioenergy debate. If we are imagining a massive use of wood for energy associated with the massive land use change, we will have a significant impact on biodiversity. Are we sure that we are properly addressing the implication and uncertainty of this point? This is very important in relation to the next slide. That is that all this biomass analysis has to do with the universe of socio-technical imaginaries. The society are building rosy scenario in which everything is possible. And one of the major technology here is the bioenergy with carbon capture energy storage. That is a sort of legendary technology that lives inside the integrated assessment models used by the IPCC. And what is the problem here? That, you know, to the best of my knowledge, this was an idea of a PhD student from Sweden that was enthusiastically endorsed by IASA. But this has been discussed by engineers, physicists, economists, but nobody asked agronomists or agroecologists or energetists about this idea. The massive production of biomass for energy purpose on marginal land is a bad idea for two reasons. One is, if it is a marginal land, there is a very high decreasing marginal return on the use of the input. If you put inputs, the input do not produce much. And second, there is a very high risk of damaging the soil and the ecosystem, the agro-ecosystem. So basically, this is the first reason why we have set aside in agricultural policy. You don't want to have input and agricultural manipulation and marginal land, because the marginal land cannot handle a high density of nutrient through the soil. And the second reason, from energetic point of view, the production of biomass with input is the step of the process where you have to put more energy in, where you have higher energy costs. So the last things you want to do is to produce energy biomass on marginal land, because you will have to use a lot of fertilizer, spend a lot of energy, and not getting an adequate return. So the conclusion is that, even assuming that we are in trouble and we really need alternative to fossil liquid fuels, not everything goes. We have a major problem ahead of us in terms of food production. We are talking about, there are different projections that we are probably will have to increase our production 100–110% for 2050. We did some scenarios of magic, and this doesn't look very easy unless you have some radical change in the way we are doing things. And then if you're looking at the report on IPBES, the situation of biodiversity is very bad and very scary. It should get top priority. So basically, we will need biomass for food security, and we will need biomass for protecting biodiversity. Probably we should try to look energy from another point of view. We should not having engineers and economists deciding all the possible scenarios, but we should be nice to have a transdisciplinary team with agroecologists discussing about the external constraints, process outside human control, that someone know about energetics, about the compatibility with internal constraints, social scientists about the desirability, whether or not this is compatible with social practices of a society. And also, it is important to start avoiding solutions that are based on externalizing to Indonesia or to other, the forests of Indonesia, the production of palm oil, because this is not saving our planet. There are other alternatives of liquid fuels. For instance, we can produce synthetic fuels from hydrogen, produced with electricity. This is another alternative. We could change the way we are doing things and reduce our consumption of fossil energy, so we can have more technology, or we can change social practice. What is important, that we should try to walk across epistemic box and not remaining stuck into the original framing that the only solution we have is to produce biofuel from biomass. Again, this is the disclaimer, and that's it.
Thanks, Mario, for bringing this uncomfortable knowledge, this presentation. For sure, we will have some question after. Now, Nico. The second speaker is Nico Polman. Mario, you can stop sharing. Yeah, thank you. The second speaker is Nico Polman from Wageningen Economic Research. And Nico, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I already shared my screen. I hope it's visible already. It is?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Symphonexis Consortium, I want to thank for the opportunity to present a bit of insight in the Symphonexis project. As already the title says, it's more or less about the low carbon and resource efficiency economy for the Netherlands. And we will go into the serious gaming part, and it's about the role of biomass and how we deal with this. Let's see if I can go down. The project team for the Dutch case is from Wageningen. The Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency and EHI Delft, who did quite a lot for the system dynamics model. The background, the context of the Netherlands. The Netherlands has an objective, an aim of 95% reduction of greenhouse gases in 2050 compared to 1990. It's a mix of all available technological measures will be necessary to reach this goal. This is one of the conclusions already from the National Environmental Assessment Agency. And the share of renewables and energy consumption is still about 7 to 8%, and half of it is generated currently from biomass. And as already shown and discussed in the previous presentation, the Netherlands is or will be unable to produce sufficient sustainable biomass itself. And what are then the challenges from this background? Is the use of biomass for energy sustainable? The net reduction or greenhouse gas emissions of biomass is strongly debated also in the Netherlands. And I think also that fits quite well, again, in the previous discussion. I think it's also the health issues when people are living near to a biomass power plant. All kinds of those issues are heavily debated and heavily discussed in the Netherlands. And what I think it's clear from that is that biomass for energy induces competing claims for land. Growing food or producing renewable energy. How does biomass energy fit within the bio-based economy cascade principle? Of course, again, competing claims, and they have to be trade-off. You cannot have everything. The aim of this case study is to provide insights in different pathways for production and use of biomass in the Netherlands between 2020 and 2050. A bit sidestep to the Symphonexis project. There are more or less similar approaches for 7 case studies all over Europe, including a global and a European one. And I think we produce for 7 of those a serious game context, which allows discussing, debating, and finding out your own pathways. And we have only time, it's 10 minutes to go through into one case study, and we choose, of course, because I'm from the Netherlands, for the Dutch one. Also more familiar with this one. It's a system dynamics model and a serious game. The basis of the model is in fact a model in which we allow us to simulate different pathways for production and use of biomass in the lands between 2020 and 2050. We modeled and we worked on the effects of land use, water, food, renewable energy, and climate, or the other way, the greenhouse gas emissions. And from this system dynamics model, we developed a serious game. And I think the serious game is in that sense interesting because it can feed the debate on biomass, it can feed the debate on what the effects on the competing claims, because people are allowing people to develop their own pathways. And the pathways can develop in time, and they can be developed with a given set of policy cards. And the serious game was developed together with a stakeholder involvement to have a game which would suit the needs of the policy debates. And I think what's important, and we saw it already, I think biomass is not something which is uniform. It has the pellets from woody pellets for energy, manure, grass, human waste, sewage sludge remainings. It's a box of different types with different competing claims, with different potential, with different technological perspectives and uses. And this is, I think, the next step into the game. We try to allow to find out what it means, what biomass really means, and how heterogeneous it is. The overall objective of the game is to support stakeholders in identifying pathways to low carbon economy and resource efficiency in 2050. The performance is reflected in the health score, and this is, again, it's giving to the idea. It's not factual, it's not detailed calculations, but it gives some kind of health score for water, which is in the right part of the vision, energy, food, and climate. And the idea of that game is that you try to score on every element of the nexus as much as possible. So you try to increase the score from a low score, for instance, for water, to a medium or even a high score, so that the nexus is supported and the nexus can be, you take into account all kinds of things. Players can build their own pathways with policy cards for land, energy, climate, and food. And in fact, playing is a learning experience, as we will show later on. Policy cards are played every 5 years with results. So you could play a certain policy card in 2030, or you could choose to play this card in 2040, depending on what you think would be a useful pathway. So we have 34 policy cards, and it's kind of land, so you could have some kind of nature inclusive farming, you could increase the forest area. And these policy cards are different for the different series games, for the different case studies in SymphonNexus. For food, you could say, I want to change the diet, and you could find out what the effect and the impact is. And the policy cards are relatively simple, because it needs to be kind of playing experience. And when you're playing the game, it will be integrated in a playing exercise with a question to start with, to introduce the game, and to check and to find out yourself what you have learned in the game. So the learning experience will be also validated from the game, from the experience you have. And it could be a half day, or it could be 1 day or 2 days. And it could also be on with different types of stakeholders. And to show a bit what the policy card could look like, it could be an increased area for energy crops. This would give more bioenergy, would allow to save on fossil fuels, less land, less cattle, and this would have consequences for food. Less manure would have consequences for water, positive. Less bioenergy, less fossil fuels, climate effect, and energy. So in this way, it's modeled in the SDM, and it is also, when players start playing the game, they can find out from the game itself how such a policy card is implemented. And another one, we simplify it a bit. Switch from coal to timber residues, less fossil fuels, would be good for climate, more import of biomass, energy, and will have global effects as well. Okay, for whom? players are interested in the nexus curve for land management, climate, energy, and want to broaden their view. So it's national and regional governments. It has been tested with national and regional governments, companies, NGOs from different sectors of energy, agriculture and food, and the biomass traders, for instance, and for research and education purposes. It has been played different types of games from different categories already in few occasions, or in many occasions, and it seems to work, and the learning experience seems to be appreciated. Come to the conclusions. I think what's one of the main conclusions from the Dutch case is the perception of biomass for energy has been negative, and many stakeholders' use of biomass energy is heavily debated. And I think this debate needs attention, and also from other sources in the Netherlands and other publications, this debate is coming on. And sometimes stakeholders, as said, living near to certain areas are really concerned with the emissions from the power plants, are really concerned with the net effect is really positive. And still also the policies implemented is often seen as more fragmented and incoherent. So the policies, for instance, on agriculture or energy, is not always seen as a coherent policy state. And I think also the biodiversity issue is quite important. And there are still knowledge gaps concerning heterogeneity and sustainability of biomass and the best application of different types. For instance, what to do with the imported woody biomass or manure. As the Netherlands has not so much woody biomass itself, manure we have too much. So these are all kinds of facts. We think that the Dutch and all the serious games in Symphonexis offer a state-of-the-art learning experience, and for stakeholders to develop their own Nexus-proof pathways. And the serious game provides insights to place how different types of biomass can be used in a low-carbon and resource-efficient economy. So you can play the cards, you can choose the timing, but you could also go back to another game when you have had this learning experience, what kind of pathways you want to have calculated in a more thorough way. And we think that it can initiate and support dialogues about the pathway implementation experience from stakeholder interaction. I think we hope that this game will contribute to this last issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you to both the speaker. And before opening the stage to the question, I will give the word to the panelists for their short speech, and I'll catch the opportunity to thank once again their participation. Please, Zoltan, if you want to start.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. My name is Zoltan Rakonsoy from Research and Innovation, and I would first like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be on this panel and reflect on what has been presented. One way I get into the picture is that I am the desk officer who is currently following these projects in DG Research and Innovation. I cannot take credit for launching the projects because I joined relatively recently, but it is nice to see the way these projects pan out and deliver results, hopefully some of which will be taken up in decision-making processes, both at the EU level or at the national level. Perhaps in the way of reacting to what we have heard, my general comment would be that it's good to step back and see the big picture, as we have seen from Mario in terms of historical context, where we have come from in terms of using energy, how we can make sure that society is supplied with sufficient energy, how to meet multiple demands, as was pointed out in the second presentation, to meet multiple objectives on the same land when there are inevitable trade-offs. Perhaps before going further, I need to list a few caveats as well, because these brief presentations could, of course, not go into all tiny detail, and some of the findings might have been very sweeping and could be further discussed in if there is an opportunity, or perhaps in the final deliverables of the projects. They are, I presume, much better fleshed out. Perhaps just to flag up that on some of the numbers we have seen, or some of the interpretations of the current rules, we probably have to look at it with more detail in terms of the subsidy level, or how to compare, for instance, subsidies given to bioenergy with other renewables, and how it should be evaluated in light of the so to say hidden subsidy given to fossil energy by not measuring the social cost of carbon and so on. But without going into that level of detail, we need to recognize that some of the issues that were pointed out by Mario are absolutely fundamental. For instance, the energy balance of energy sources, that we need society to have a lot of available energy that allows our industrial society to function. And that, of course, doesn't mean that every single energy source has to have as high, so to say, energy return on energy invested, if that's what we call that quantity. Perhaps taking into account the quality of energy as well as the quantity, we get a more refined picture. But in the big context, we have to consider that if certain energy sources have a lower rate of return on energy invested, then other sources have to make up for this. The example of the Netherlands was a very interesting one, especially that it came up in both presentations. And the Netherlands is in many ways a rather special example, because it's a rather entrepreneurial country, and in many ways it's in the forefront of developing technologies. But also it's not typical because of the special role the Port of Rotterdam plays in Europe. So if we are looking at imports versus domestic consumption and so on, that needs a bit of a more detailed analysis. And I believe both presentations very usefully refer to certain aspects of imports, how to maintain its sustainability, and how import-dependent societies can rely on imported bioenergy. There is nothing fundamentally wrong in relying on imports, but there are difficult challenges to meet when we base our energy supply on such imports, because we have to consider that even if the imports are coming from sources that we consider sustainable, other regions of the world, including the source countries, might rely on the same resource eventually. So how to ensure that what we count on will remain available and we remain sustainable. So these are things that we constantly have to struggle with. Perhaps turning to more specifics on the second presentation. Yeah, just a couple of reflections. It was very good to point out that we need to differentiate among different bioenergy sources, and they are too often lumped together, which is very unfortunate. And it was the number one conclusion in the second presentation, that the public perception of bioenergy or biomass, I don't know how it was phrased, is persistently negative. that is something that we should avoid, because bioenergy has been around since the beginning of humanity, and it can be and should be used sustainably. We just have to make sure that we use it in the right way, at the right scale, without compromising the underlying resource, and without discrediting this very important energy source. So that's probably a challenge for policymakers in the present and the future, to ensure that that is the case. And I thank you both very much for the very interesting presentations, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoltan. Lotte, maybe you want to go? Lotte from Delft University of Technology. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and also thank you very much for the interesting presentations. Yeah, I think a lot of what's been said is true, that we need to be concerned about what do we gain with biofuels if we have a lot of input into them, because we shouldn't forget that growing biomass is also cost us a lot of energy, and I think that's a very valuable point. And there were many interesting points. I think my main comment would be that I think if we look at policies so far to support biofuels, it's been mainly being evaluated on sustainability aspects, where sustainability has been conceptualized as efficiency, both environmental efficiency as well as economic efficiency. What value can we take out of biomass while using the least amount of resources? And I also saw this reflected in a serious game by Nico, and I think these are very important points, but I think we're actually missing something, and that is more the social aspect. So Mario asked in his presentation, why did we start producing agro-biofuels? I think a big reason for that was, aside from the hopes that it would be sustainable, is that it would support farmers, that it would give them an additional income. And I think that is an aspect that we should look into more, because if we can develop biomass and the production of biomass in such a way that it can benefit farmers both in Europe and in other parts of the world, then I think we can build a sustainable supply of biomass, because it will help farmers diversify their income. It might give them an incentive to care for biodiversity if this is managed rightly. And therefore, I would like to argue that when we look at the sustainability of biofuels, we should also look at the concept of resilience. Can we build bio-based value chains that are resilient and that can withstand global catastrophic events such as a pandemic, for instance? And for that to work, local stakeholders have to be involved, and they have to, their knowledge and their values and their interests have to be taken into account. Because only if local stakeholders have agency and they care about the crops that they're growing and they care about what products they're going into, can we have resilient systems. And resilience is a bit of a vague concept, of course. It's not as easy to monitor as economic efficiency or environmental efficiency, but already people are developing indicators for that. And I think if we use resilience more as a concept, then we can move away a bit from the generalizations about biofuels, like saying first generation biofuels are the worst option. Sometimes they are not the worst option. It depends on the local context. So for instance, we did a case study in Jamaica where there were lots of sugarcane farmers who lost their access to the European markets because of some changes in trade agreements. And they had a lot of sugarcane and they couldn't sell it to anyone, and they were really, really desperate for a new market. And I think if you look at such a case, you can see that locally it would have been great for them if they could have biofuels as a new way to deal with sugarcane. also we did a state case study in Brazil, and we saw there that when sugarcane plantations were expanded, that had a lot of beneficial effects to local stakeholders. I noticed that Mario called it the crop of misery, but because international companies have come in and they've developed this this industry further, they also took care more of good working conditions, gender equality. The income has generally gone up. So I think if we also look at that aspect of biofuels, the social implications it can have, then I think it could really change our view a bit. But for that, we also need to do more case studies, do more local experimentation. It's not one size fits all. But I think it would be valuable. And I think, yeah, this is what I really wanted to say, because I really liked your basic question for this project. What are alternative framings of biofuels? And I would say biofuels as a means to achieve global resilience, that would be something I would like to see back in the framing of biofuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Lotte, for your contribution. Now the third panelist, Zsolt from the Institute of European Energy and Climate Policy. Zsolt?
Yes. Good morning to everyone.
Thank you for being here.
Let me share my screen with you just to support this discussion with a handful of contextual points. Not debating what Lotte was saying, that we need to be broader in terms of sustainability than environment, and I think that's also what was coming from all from the presentations, with all the trade-offs and with the complexities. But I think it's absolutely striking that when we talk about biofuels and bioenergy, in a broader sense, we are really looking at those issues which are most painful from a planetary boundary concept. If you look at the chart which I'm just bringing up on seeing where exactly we stand on these biophysical boundaries of mankind, and you just look at it from a biofuels perspective, then you would see that these are the areas where we are already outside or very close to those boundaries. So it's just a sort of reflection that if we are looking at a solution to a problem which has been around for a long time, and I have followed this 20 years, how bioenergy was sort of emerging as a panacea for emission reductions as in a very narrow manner, and then you just look at it on the global environmental or biophysical boundaries, then you find that this is an area which is really stretching in these particular fields with biosphere, biodiversity, and with biochemical flows associated both with agriculture and with forestry activities. So it's just a striking point that if we take a step back and we look at the big picture, which I think all of the presenters were already looking at by looking at the interconnections, the trade-offs, and so on, this is an extremely painful area where we are already operating at the boundaries of mankind, which again, I guess, is a reflection whether or not we are in a position of doing things, anything which is socially attractive in an area where we are actually on the border of doing huge harm for ourselves by pushing ourselves over environmental boundaries. The second element, which I think, again, Mario was very explicit about it, bringing up examples and really asking not so rhetoric questions, is land use. How on earth, how much earth or planet we have, and if we look at various uses from sustaining biodiversity and sustaining the earth as a living system, feeding more than 7 billion people, perhaps more than 10 billion people by 2050, what is left? And on that, I just thought that bringing up a map showing what we do, how we need to expand nature protection and areas which are producing ecosystem services for us beyond food and beyond bioenergy, then perhaps we are very little left as time goes. And that's, I think, again, a reflection on competing use of land. And again, there is a very strong social angle to that, which I think Lotte has alluded to by saying that, well, those particular farmers in particular locations are just not able to continue in the very unsustainable way how they have been working, and we really need to look at alternative methods of feeding them, keeping them busy, getting them a pay job. But in this respect, I guess it's fair to say that when it comes to actually nature protection, that's also a job for a farmer. Instead of cultivating something which is planted, perhaps these people do cultivate what nature has provided for us. And again, knowing that there are very, very serious trade-offs of keeping up biodiversity and keeping up the planet and producing food for 10 billion people. Then an angle which I think was mentioned by Mario in terms of what future challenges we will be facing, and that is biofuels for aviation. And this is where I see the lurking monster somewhere around the corner. As we all know how aviation, I mean, despite the pandemic, is likely to be an extremely heavy growth sector in which technological solutions, unlike in land transportation, when hydrogen electrification offers a short-term alternative, in aviation, for the time being, it seems that sustainable biofuels, liquid biofuels, will be giving us a solution for many, many years to come. And what I just wanted to highlight that even on present levels, but especially with the growth of aviation, this is going to be an extremely significant amount. And this is where I expect that there will be a reopening of the liquid biofuel debate with a particular large demand materializing. And again, having all those debates, what we have already had in the last 20 years, with all those trade-offs and all those difficult questions to answer. And then a fourth reflection, as we have been talking about the Netherlands, partly by design, partly by accident, both Nico and Lotte coming from there, me being Hungarian, but having spent 14 years in the Netherlands in the past, and our research institute is headquartered there. Let me just reflect on an extremely concerning study, which was actually carried out by PBL, a partner of Nico in the Simnexus project, and the Dutch Central Bank, which was published last week. And it looked at how Dutch banks are directly and indirectly affecting the world, how they are actually knowing, do they know what the impacts are, and what is the impact. And what this chart is bringing up clearly shows that corporates who are behind biofuel use, who are behind all sorts of production and all sorts of activities, really have very, very limited knowledge on how they affect biodiversity. Some of them simply have no idea, and they don't report, they don't even collect data through their supply chains. Some of them actually report, and they claim that, well, whatever they say should not be made public. So there is data on the impacts on biodiversity, but we can't access that. Then there is a large number of companies who accept the risks, and they say that they will manage it, admitting that they would have major limitations in that sort of management. And when it comes to biofuels, which again is also very clear from history that whatever we do within Europe, if we still rely on them, a large volume would be coming from outside of the European Union. This is a huge red flag for me, that we are relying on major corporates, supported by our entire economic systems, with extremely limited knowledge on what impacts their activities are. And that's something which I guess when it comes to regulators, I think it's an extremely important field to look at, that as soon as we realize that we are looking at and we are actually encouraging activities outside of our control of domain, which is literally the physical area of Europe, with sovereigns acting more or less in a decent way, we should take very, very important extra care to do that. And I think Zoltán mentioned this aspect, that we simply don't know what is going on, or what are the direct and indirect impacts of regulations in this field. So let me just conclude that with the sustainability taxonomy approved last week by the European Parliament, I think we have taken one step towards wiping out the most difficult or the most controversial parts, and that's third generation biofuels, which are no longer seen as sustainable, even under a very political definition of sustainability, but it still allows everything else remaining in this domain. And I think we just need to do a lot of hard work in order to really do the assessment and figuring out how biofuels, liquid biofuels would affect our future steps, how they should be incorporated into 2050 decarbonization, what role they should be playing in that entire sustainability finance mix, what we are trying to design with all the supporting policies, rules and regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zolt, and thank you to all the speaker and panelists. We will go ahead and take some time for a question now. And it looks like we have few questions. I will start with one for Mario and one for Nico. The first question is from Massimo Bressan from ARPA Veneto in Italy, and it's for Mario. In feasibility terms, is there a solution right now for at least the partial substitution of fossil fuels? If not, it seems from the presentation, what is the right direction to point to? Does it imply a radical change in the way human society are now organized? What is your uncomfortable point of view? Any hope to overcome the actual virtual reality from the past as given by the use of fossil fuel? Mario, do you want to address this question?
I can. I mean, personally, I mean, this again is my opinion. I don't think that we can remain. Oops, I don't have it. Oh, start the video. Sorry. I don't think that we can keep the actual metabolic pattern of our society, in which basically all the energy that is consumed in Europe is per person in a year is generated by 8 hours of work. This is, if you divide the hour work in the energy sector by the energy that we consume, is done in 8 hours. That all the food that we eat is produced in 40 hours of work in 1 year. So we are in a system in which basically we maximize the throughput of energy, food, water, whatever, per hour of work to have the vast majority of our time in consuming or in the service sector. This is not compatible with the natural flows of nature. So if we are talking about circularization, bioeconomy, all this policy legend, we have to be aware of the fact that this is our standard of living are due to the fact that we are forcing flows outside the natural pace and the natural density. At the moment, in my view, we do not have alternatives to fossil energy with the actual technology. Look what happened with the Energiewende. They spent 200 billion and basically they couldn't guarantee a substitution of electricity, only electricity production that is a small part of the total with intermittent, because we do not have batteries, we don't have storage. With liquid fuels at the moment, I show that there is nothing basically. So it would be nice to start reflecting on what we have. We can change quite dramatically. The COVID-19 showed pretty clearly that we can overnight change what we do and nothing. But if we manage to change on a long basis, temporarily you can stay in the home and not do anything, but for how long? We will have to do radical change. And one point about what Lotte was saying about the biofuel protecting the farmers. Personally, I don't think so. The real problem here is that we have at the moment what is called high external input agriculture. The agriculture is run by agribusiness and by industries. So the farmers are not protected at all. As a matter of fact, in the Netherlands now, in the last 20 years, the GDP from agribusiness quadrupled and the farmers reduced to 25%. So the industrial agriculture is not protecting the farmers, and the idea of producing agro-biofuel necessarily has to go through industrial agriculture, and this is not protecting the farmers. If you want to protect the farmers, we have to take out of the situation in which the farmers are producing food for the cities, because this is what happened now. The farmers are there just to produce cheap food for the cities, for urban population. If we don't take out this, nothing happens. So answering the question, we can do whatever, you know, look at the COVID, we can do whatever, but we have to be ready to change the way we are doing things. The idea that you keep doing exactly what we do now, taking out fossil energy, putting in some mill wind, some biofuel, simply is not credible. But this is my personal opinion. Of course, this is not an opinion of Magic Project, it's my personal view of the issue.
Lotte, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, no, Mario, I agree with you completely that the agro business is now not acting in the interest of farmers. But I think we can develop it in ways that it does take into account the interest of farmers. And actually what we've seen in Brazil, the farmers were benefiting, or the cane cutters were benefiting. And we are now also trying to develop cases and working with industry there to develop systems in which farmers are benefiting. So I completely agree, we need to change the things that we have been doing, but I think we can, or we should at least try, because biomass is a possible solution to get away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have very detrimental effects, and we can't always use bikes to transport ourselves. We also have ships, we also have planes, and for that we need alternatives in the short term. So I think especially for these two sectors, we should at least try to find sustainable solutions.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I have a question for Nico. And the question is, the game's conclusion that burning forestry residues as a replacement for fossil fuels suggests that the game incorporates the concept that burning forest wood is instantaneously zero carbon or carbon neutral. Yet you say the carbon benefits of forest biomass are debated. How can the game produce good results if it incorporates these old assumptions that do not account for carbon debt? If you want to address this question in 2-3 minutes, Nico?
Yeah, I'm ready to. Want to first make a comment on the last comment. I much agree that the agribusiness sector is not acting on the interest of farmers. Of course, it can be different and it has to improve, but I think it's not fair. To comment on the burning forestry residues, of course, the thing is we had 10 minutes to present the model, and I just took a grasp, was not able to show all the things included, so I don't think we have old knowledge. And I want also to comment a few seconds on the comment of Lotte. She was concluding that we were not having social aspects included in the model. It is included, although not so detailed. But again, it's not a nice argument, but I had not much time to go in every detail. But we have some kind of social capital losing and social capital gaining within certain measures. And it was guessed by experts how much a certain measure would contribute over how much would be debated to the extent to which what it contributes to social capital. So yeah, it's not so nice to give the comment that we had no time, but it is what it is.
Okay, thanks. I will go to another question. There is few question about the perspective of Jatropha plant for future biofuels production. Can you please explain in light of the 2050 carbon neutral goal of the EU? So one is about Jatropha, and another one is about other forms of waste before rising conclusion on the lack of potential of waste for biofuel production. Anyone want to comment on this?
I can give you an anecdote about the Jatropha. I have a project in Namibia for alternative energy, and then we have Zivaye, was the head of the project. Before was working for the government for the diffusion of alternative biomass, and he was in a project for Jatropha, and he was at a certain point he was had to escape because the farmer wanted to kill him because the experiment with Jatropha didn't went very well. After producing all the things, they get probably 80 kilos of nuts that were not particularly rewarding in terms of either of money or energy. I don't know. I mean, always you find new things. They tried also in India. It was not very successful. What was the waste as well? It would be very nice when we discuss about waste to start with how much waste do we have and how much is the cost to get waste, because especially for animal waste is a delicate issue of treating them. Then another discussion is that with the concept of biorefinery, we could try to valorize other possible use of these wastes rather than burning them. So, I mean, there are a lot of always discussion. Everything is complex. What I'm saying is everything is possible, but it would be nice to have transdisciplinary teams dealing with the issue, because these issues are complex. And we are doing it with very simplified models. There is someone that say, this is okay, this is okay, this is relevant, this is not relevant. And it would be nice to have more people coming from different perspectives, and especially talk with the local people to see whether or not this is solving the problem. Because again, this is the example of Lotte. You are in a place where they are only sugarcane and they have to do something. Of course, it is very good of doing biofuel. Different is if you are in a situation like in Europe, you have an agricultural sector that already heavily depend on import. Because guys, in the Netherlands, they're using 15 times more land that they have for the feed that they are importing for animals, and say we want to use land for doing energy. I mean, so every case is special. It is very difficult to do generalization. And I agree also with what Zoltan said. We have been using biomass forever, and we will keep using biomass forever. So it's not about using biomass or not. It's how wise is our use of biomass. So we cannot say biofuels are bad or biofuels are good. But what I was flagging that there is a tendency of using the biofuel as a techno scientific imaginary, that we can, yes, we can, no problem, we can keep doing what we are doing forever, and it's not the case. We should stop inventing excuse. We have to change what we are doing. And biofuel will not solve our problems. Our problem is with us. And I don't know if I answered the Iatropa and the waste things properly, but I mean.
And maybe Zoltan and Salt want to add something on this new generation of biofuels and new perspectives and challenges.
Perhaps if I can add something to it. First of all, I would hesitate to call it new generation because Jatropha is an oil crop. So basically it's conventional biodiesel. One attraction of it was supposedly high yield. I'm not an expert in sources, but my understanding is that it didn't quite meet the expectations. One thing that is important to keep in mind is that it's a toxic plant. So Jatropha as a plant is toxic to animals and humans, which of course means that it's not a food crop as such, but it competes with food crops if you grow it as a dedicated crop, which has all the downsides of food competition. But one attraction of it was that you could use it to grow in hedges, for instance, between fields or as a landscape element, which could diversify farms, and there it could have a certain potential, but then you also have a much lower density in the landscape and perhaps for local uses rather than large-scale production. The reason why I wanted to come in on this one is that this question was combined with a question on the 2050 carbon neutral goal, which I perhaps should have highlighted. I don't think it should be combined with Jatropha as such, because its production is basically negligible and it's not in our control because we don't grow it in Europe. But the 2050 goal is of course a major development of recent months, and it should indeed frame our discussions on energy and climate for the coming years, all the way to 2050, I believe. And as you all know, there are being high level commitments to making Europe so-called carbon neutral. It is being defined what it actually means. And the Commission is in the process of identifying how the 2030 target could be increased and how we can put ourselves on a pathway to 2050. Now, how bioenergy contributes to this is something that needs to be considered consistently throughout this process. It's a bit early to go into specific, let alone to mention individual sources of bioenergy.
Thank you. Maybe a last word from Zolt, just to close, because we are running out of the time.
Just two quick reflections on the 2050 and in the sort of relative role of bioenergy. I guess both to be put in a sort of historic context, looking back the 20 years which I have spent on this. One thing is really striking, that with the emergence of solar and wind from a fringe technology to mainstream, which is being really cost competitive, I really see a major shift away from bioenergy as a panacea or as a major part of the solution of the energy challenges what we see. I'm not saying obviously that with wind and solar, with intermittent energy generation, we are solving these issues easily, but at least we are taking away pressures on bioenergy as a major element of that particular equation, which we are always facing, and we are also facing with 2050. The other angle which I would like to reflect on is, again, coming back to this sort of general sustainability, which I think all of us alluded to. Obviously, Lotte also was very specifically bringing in the other elements, the sort of societal or just a part of this. And on that, what I see as hopeful is the fact that Europe is now looking at the direct and indirect impacts of its actions on the rest of the world. And I think with bioenergy, but with all these other elements, this is absolutely essential. And I think this is an extreme welcome step with, from indirect measures such as carbon border adjustments and taxations to all those elements which were also used by Mario as an example of indirect land use, how we discovered through this bioenergy journey on what damages we have made to the rest of the world. What I am lacking, and on that again last week decision of delegating the task to the Commission, and I think Zoltán will be part of the team working on this, is figuring out those particular metrics and those elements which we are looking at sustainability, both in terms of climate change mitigation or environmental impacts in a broader sense, and also in terms of resilience and adaptation to climate change. And I think this overall framing of acknowledging that whatever we do within Europe has an impact on the rest of the world, and that's elevated to a high level and to a detailed regulations, and also the fact that we do actually want to look at the complexities of all those issues what we were discussing today is really, really a welcome sign. I mean, could have or should have come 20 years or 30 years ago, but at least I think it seems that we are grasping the problems, the trade-offs, the complexities, what we are facing, and with that we are trying to come up with a solution. And I think I'm just a very proud EU citizen to be part of that journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Just because we are running out of the time, although we have not addressed all the interesting questions we had, but if you want to continue the discussion on biofuels, you can use our forum. You have the link here, so we can continue discussing. And I will have, just to wrap up, a couple of insights from the panelists that we had. So biomass has been around since the beginning of humanity, and of course we have to be concerned about their use in terms of direct and indirect detrimental effects and impacts. And a broader view on the production and use of biofuels, also including the social aspect, is still partially missing. So I think this is an important point that we discussed in this webinar. And what was interesting for me, and hopefully also for the audience, was that the bad or good dichotomy of biomass and biofuel cannot be longer applied, because the sustainability of biomass and biofuel options depends on the social context. So I want to thanks once again everyone. We appreciate you being here. And I'd like to thank once again our speakers, panelists, and the technical support of Paolo from JRC. And I want to remind you that the presentations are already available on our website. So if you want to know more about MAGIC and about the analysis that we are doing, so you can visit our website. So thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Thank you, speakers and panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.